Good evening. I'm Lori Tisch, and on behalf of my mother, my brothers Stephen and Jonathan, my sister and my sister-in-law Lizzie, I would like to thank you for joining us for the first Preston Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership. As you can imagine, there was no shortage of candidates who met the criteria for this award, which was an individual through his or her leadership who has made a significant impact on community, fostering opportunities for increased access to education, employment, healthcare, arts, culture, sports and parks, and recreation, primarily in American urban settings. My family and I would have been happy with just about all of the candidates, but to say that we are truly over the moon with today's selection is an enormous understatement. On the surface, Preston Robert Tisch and Wynton Marsalis have little in common, well, except for maybe fancy first names. Bob Tisch was a middle-class Jewish boy from Brooklyn who, with his brother Larry, purchased in 1946 the Laurel in the Pines, a resort hotel in Lakewood, New Jersey, and built it into an enormously successful conglomerate, now Lowe's Corporation. My father also branched out on his own and in 1991 purchased 50% of the New York Giants, which the Star-Ledger referred to as the perfect partnership. Unlike Wynton, my father knew little about the arts in general and virtually nothing about music, except that his lifelong and cherished friend, Beverly Sills, was very, very famous. And I would venture to guess he didn't even know exactly what she did. And although he was totally colorblind and couldn't sing, paint, dance, or even whistle, he did know that the arts and arts institutions were critically important to a democratic society and were something that should be shared and appreciated by all. And so he got involved philanthropically and supported in a tremendous way a wide array of cultural institutions, such as the Tisch School of the Arts, the Children's Museum of Manhattan, the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum, the Whitney, the Museum at the University of Michigan, and so many more. As most of you know, my father made a lasting impact on society in business, sports, public service, and philanthropy. Walter Isaacson will tell you a little bit more about Wynton later on in the program, but I will just say that, unlike my father, Wynton knows a lot about the arts, as demonstrated by his being the first jazz artist to be awarded the Pulitzer Prize in Music, as well as serving as the artistic director and the music director of the wildly successful Jazz at the Lincoln Center Orchestra. So knowing of their many differences, why was an African American from New Orleans selected to receive the first Preston Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership? To my family and to those at the Aspen Institute, the answer is really quite simple, because Preston Robert Tisch and Wynton Marsalis had more similarities than differences, especially in the areas of unparalleled leadership, which is what this award represents. We looked for someone who, like my father, had an enormous impact on their community, country, and even the world in a variety of ways, both conventional and unconventional, and we clearly found the perfect recipient. My father built some of the country's best-known and important cultural, educational, and service institutions, including the Preston Robert Tisch Brain Tumor Center at Duke University, City Meals on Wheels, and his signature project, Take the Field, which brought 43 fields back to life from what Alaire Townsend, editor of Crane's New York Business, once referred to as the deplorable state of high school athletic fields. Bob was also acknowledged for his stellar personal skills and his uncanny ability to make everyone feel recognized, valued, and important. For this, Mayor Dinkins asked him to become New York City's first ever ambassador to Washington with the duty of serving as a critical link between the New York business community and New York's Washington office. From his earliest days, my father brought people together for the betterment of society, as does Wynton Marsalis, who with his art has clearly breathed new life into what has been called the quintessential American art form. His creative genius alone is worthy of this and so many other awards, which his exceptional talent and dedication have made him one of the world's most famous, respected, and inspirational leaders. Wynton Marsalis and my father had another thing in common, that they wanted to help make people's lives better. My father was famous for his expression, "I'll take care of it." That's what he'd say when someone, anyone, asked for help, whether a doorman at one of his hotels or one of the city's major power brokers. He'd jot down in a little notebook that he kept handy in his breast pocket, and the next day he would indeed take care of it. But today's award isn't just about talent, it's about leadership and what one chooses to do with their recognition. And like my father, Wynton elected to change the world, or at the very least, a significant portion of it. He used his bully pulpit to become a powerful, eloquent, and effective advocate for the arts, and he has spoken with great knowledge and passion about the role of the arts in our public sphere and in our schools. He reminds us constantly to ask how a nation can be truly great if it elects not to nurture arts and artists, and he is on a mission to demonstrate the power of art to heal, to inspire, to teach, and to bring us together as individuals and as a nation. Lastly, like my father, Wynton is a relentless fundraiser for what he feels is important, and many of you in this room have surely witnessed he is not at all afraid to do whatever is needed to make his dreams become a reality and to list as many people as needed to make that quest happen. For Wynton, just like for Bob Tisch, even the impossible dream was within reach and something to be attained. To celebrate Wynton's unique and innovative form of leadership, my family and I are pleased and honored to present the 2010 Preston Robert Tisch Award to our friend and to our inspiration, Wynton Marsalis. So, Wynton, I don't have anything here to give you except my speech, so, so I hope that will do. And no, a little bit later on, we'll be presenting you, my brothers and my mother and I, my sister-in-law will be presenting you for a check to go to the institution of your dreams. And we thank you again for all that you've done for New York and for the country and for the world. And now it's again a great pleasure, well, I don't want to say to introduce, but to bring on Walter Isaacson, who is the leader of the Aspen Institute and has done so much for the world, and especially for New Orleans. I'm sure that would be in his conversation with Wynton. Walter, thank you.
Yeah, let's go sit down. I was listening to Laurie talk about her dad, and it reminded me of the first rule of biography, which is, it's all about dad. And your father is one of the coolest people around, Ellis Marsalis. Tell me a little bit about your father and how he was a great influence on your life.
Well, my father, he led a lot just by example, and he was always very cool. So you never had a period where you rebelled against him or any of this kind of thing, because he was so much cooler than whoever you were going to rebel with. You always chose him. He was just really just a local musician in New Orleans and in Canada. He was a band director. He grew up in segregation. He was one of the, just as an influence, you couldn't ask for a better influence. And he didn't talk, he liked to talk, but he didn't talk you into understanding something. He would do it himself. Like, he practiced every day, so you understood, okay, I better practice if I want to learn how to play. And he also treated other people with so much respect, any type of person. He talked the same way to everyone, and I would notice how my father, it could be a homeless person, or it could be the mayor. It didn't make a difference. He was always really the same person. He was not a judgmental person. And when I graduated from high school, he gave me a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi. And I didn't know he was interested in that at all. That was the first time I knew anything about that he had that even as an interest. He said, man, check this book out. And he always talked to you like you were a man. When I was 4 or 5, he said, well, man, you could do one or two things, you know. And my brothers and I would get together and we tease him, we laugh about him all the time, like, you know, the way he did things. But I saw him many years play concerts for very few people. Or maybe it'd be 7 or 8 people in a club, and he always played the same way. And I remember once when I was 13 or 12, he had a gig in a hotel, and of course people were just talking the whole time he played. And I sat on the piano stool next to him. I said, man, you're not tired of people talking while you're playing? And he looked at me and went, shh. So, I mean, I loved him. I was always trying to, even to this day, I try to make him proud, and he's still cool.
Yep. He once taught you about Louis Armstrong, right? You didn't appreciate Louis Armstrong.
I didn't like Louis Armstrong. Any kid my age, a black kid, we equated everything with New Orleans music with Handkerchief Head and Tarman. And Louis Armstrong, maybe we didn't see him that much on TV, but we knew he was smiling a lot, and that wasn't the way we grew up. We weren't thinking about that style of music or that way of being, and we didn't have a love of history being Americans also. It was, we had a double whammy. So my father I had been hearing him talk about Louis Armstrong my entire growing up, but I didn't really check Pops out. You know, I said, check Pops out, check Pops out. You got to check Pops out. So when I left New Orleans, came to New York. I was 17. He sent me a tape. It was a cassette tape then. He said, yeah, man, I was listening to Louis Armstrong playing Jubilee. You should just put that on. I put it on. I said, okay, I'm going to just learn it. It was the first time I ever learned a Louis Armstrong solo, because I would learn Miles Davis solos or Freddie Hubbard or John Coltrane. And this Louis Armstrong solo, which seemed so much simpler than those other solos, I couldn't play all the way through. And I mean, I had pretty good endurance. I could play the Brandenburg Concerto, and I could play difficult pieces. I thought, could Louis Armstrong really be playing this much horn that you can't make it through a solo he played on a 3-minute record? And that was the first night I called my father. I was like, man, I think I got a much better understanding of something about Louis Armstrong. And it was the ground floor of an understanding, which, of course, as time has passed, has flowered. But that's kind of how he teaches. He teaches through eggs. And he taught a lot of us, me, Harry Connick, Terrence Blanchard, Donald Harrison. A lot of musicians who come out of New Orleans in that time were taught by my father.
Do you think the diversity and race issues in New Orleans help lead to the creativity?
Yeah, I think the fact that we started off French.
You and me.
Right? Well, we from New Orleans, we did. That's what we did. And the French have a certain relationship to the situation that's different from the American relationship when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to many issues. And there's the Spanish kind of organized it. And we had the Creole, we had the caste system, we had a version of Catholicism. And we had also the slaves could play their instruments and sell things. They had a marketplace, which they didn't have anywhere else. So
You mean Congo Square?
in Congo Square, it was not just that they played music and dance, they also had commerce. And they had kind of a slave economic infrastructure, which didn't exist. And there was a certain wildness, unruly quality, and a freedom, which, you know, is just a part of our way of life. And I think that kind of sense of freedom and wildness and the type of history makes us be the way that we are.
You gave one of the best speeches, which was this American for the Arts speech, and you talked about freedom that way. And you said that was when we sing of ourselves, we know ourselves. And the song is about freedom, really. It's an American song in the history.
Right. The American song is about a freedom which is earned by earning that freedom for other people. It's like the saying, what you create is what you get. We all have the gift of creativity. And many times when we talk about racial issues, it's something my father used to always tell me. If you would ever say all of everybody, or they or all, he would say, hey man, who is they? So you knew he was mad when he asked you who they was. Man, you know they. Well, can you tell me who they is? They're out there. He said, do you know them? Why, everybody knows them. Have you met them? Have you gone down there where they are? And of course the answer to all those is no. Then he would say, well, you don't know. First, there is no they. You are they. And then he would say, if you said all, he would say all of everybody never does anything unless it's drinking water. And so I think he would always say that don't forget that the history of Afro-American people, black people, is the fight for civil rights was always black and white versus white. It was never black versus white. He said, when you take an issue that's complex and you reduce it to something that's inaccurate, then you start to really have even more problems as time passes because you begin to base your philosophy on inaccuracy.
Do you think we have a pretty poor feel for our history?
I feel it. I think we have a pretty poor
I mean, you
feeling
even once
for-
said blacks have a poor feel for their history.
Well, for our own history, no question about that. I mean, but that can't really be argued. There are a complexity of reasons why we as a nation have a misunderstanding of our history, and there's another set of reasons for why the Afro-American does not have an understanding of our history. And they're also both one and the same. So whenever you talk about the Afro-American, you're also talking about the American. So to separate the two many times becomes tricky in terms of we really don't have an understanding of the symbolic value of things in our history. There's a great symbolism in our history, and we don't teach that to our kids. We will teach that we have a history and a legacy of slavery, but we really also have a legacy of coming together. And we will teach, these things are very important because the symbols are what you live by.
And we come together with music a lot, right?
We used to, but not so much now.
But I mean, from the early days of colonial history through the Civil War, which was fought in song.
Yeah, I mean, we used to be bound. We have a very interesting racial history when it comes to music. And it comes to a point when the kids come from England and become more celebrated in America than homegrown artists because of the color of their skin. And that irony was not lost on them. And since that time, since the 1960s, we've kind of retrenched. What you thought would happen after the swing era did not happen. In terms of us dancing together, in terms of us singing together, in terms of us addressing our Americanness as one, in terms of us really taking off and developing on the artistry of people like Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Frankie Manning, all the great dancers. There's a great tradition there. We've not developed that because I don't think we as a nation have identified yet the value of that.
What is the value of arts in general, and music in particular, in helping us understand our history?
Well, I think music first is the art of the invisible. So it organizes all things that cannot be seen that are in the human sphere. For example, thought. Okay, so I see you say, The way you said that is a song. And the way I'm trying to feel like when you're talking to me, I'm trying to feel many things. You know, am I talking too much? Do you want to ask another question? Did you like what I said? Did you not? And I'm hearing, I'm hearing all of that in that. And it deals with emotions. It deals with imagination. It deals with a depth of disappointment that cannot be described in words. Music organizes these things. And music also exists on a stream that sits outside of historical fact. That's how you get figures like Bach. So you listen to Bach's music, any instrument can play it and it sounds like Bach's music. And it's on a stream that's not related. You say he's from the Baroque era, or he lived from here to 1750. Yeah, he lived then, but what he was thinking about was not from then. And so music helps us with that. And the arts in general provide us with an understanding of why we are alive.
Why do you think we should be teaching arts in the schools? Is it for that reason?
I think the arts give meaning to things, and we have lost a sense of meaning. We've become a people of laws more than a people of ethics. The arts don't exist in the realm of laws. They exist in the realm of ethics. That's why you find all these kind of history of temperamental artists who are so engrossed in the ethical proposition of their art that they do dumb things that become very colorful and are written and talked about for centuries. it's because of the intense relationship they have with ethics. Like a person like Beethoven was a very, very ethical person. Duke Ellington was very ethical. He sacrificed everything he had to keep his band on the road and to keep when people stopped liking the music, when all the big bands died, Duke Ellington sacrificed everything to keep that band going and keep that music going. When it became kind of passé in terms of the public perception of him in the 1960s, he was popular as a jazz artist, but when the Beatles and James Brown and all the groups that really, Duke Ellington was not amongst them, he maintained a contact and a seriousness and an interest in his art and in the developing of it. It's an ethical issue.
And you've been advocating that we shouldn't cut back in this age of teaching science, teaching math, whatever, teaching arts in the schools. Why is that?
If you don't know who you are, it doesn't really make a difference what you do.
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather you know who you are and not worry about competing with the Chinese than you don't know and you think you're competing with somebody. Because when you don't know who you are, you don't know how to put you don't know where to place your gifts. Like, it's interesting. We're talking about Bob Tisch. He obviously knew where to place his gifts. He had gifts. He was bringing people together. And he could have funded getting all of the fields for the kids himself. He wanted the people to come together around the issue. He wanted to be an example of that. Lou Rudin, he was talking about. Bob and Lou, I love Lou. I think about Lou all the time. Jack, I love Jack. That's my man. Mm-hmm. He and I would go up to DeWitt Clinton High School and be principals for a day, and the school is all black now. So I'd ask him, Jack, why you still come up here? He said, man, I graduated this is where I'm from. Mm-hmm. And I'm still from here. I said, you got to work on your jump shot, though. But Lou, in New York institutions, you see Lou, Bob, it's a certain feeling that they bring with them. And that feeling is the feeling of bringing people together. That's what the arts are. They create the feeling of community. You take that first person sitting around a campfire, lying about some mastodon or something, singing a song about it, saying they did something. They didn't do it, but they should have done it. And that creates, in the person who hears that song, this 10 years old, I'm going to go out and get this mastodon like he did. And that's how we progress. We create the mythology of the thing, and then we live that mythology as if it's real. Mm-hmm. And it becomes real. And when we have a reverse and inverse mythology, we create a negativity and an ignorance, and we take the worst of what we are, and we hold that up. Because we all have a worst. But why should we present that? Mm-hmm. We all have a best, too.
Do you think there's a distinction between high culture and popular culture when it comes to music, or should there be a distinction? Or maybe to ask it in a simpler way, why did Bix Beiderbecke's parents, why were they disappointed in him?
Bix Beiderbecke's parents were disappointed in him out of ignorance. Okay, but Matisse's parents were disappointed in him out of ignorance. Yeah. And there's a level of ignorance that affects all of us when it comes to things that we don't know about, and in the arts in general. If you're interested in someone making money, and they come and tell you, I'm going to play trumpet in a jazz band, and there's a guy from Iowa, and he's playing music that's equated with black people who are, of course, scorned and treated with the maximum amount of disrespect you could have in our culture, and you're a father or mother of a kid, you think, what? You're going to do what? And that's what they thought. The cruelty that was done to him was that he sent them recordings and they didn't listen to him. So I take that example even when I deal with my own kids, that when they come up with something that I really don't like, and I really want to just commit an act of violence on them, I listen to it before I do the violence. Then I say, I heard it. But I mean, there's a lesson in that. And with Matisse's father, it was the same way. Why don't you want to continue?
Are you talking about rap music to some extent?
Oh, rap music, whatever the form is that you don't like.
Right.
Wearing your pants down.
What do you think of rap music?
I think rap music is a great extension of rock and roll. Mm-hmm. And I feel that I don't look at anything separate from the entire context of it in music because that's my field. And when you start with a mythology that's rebel without a cause, a celebration of a certain type of amateurism, a nihilistic take on certain aspects of your culture, devaluing the rhythm section. All kind of stuff I could talk about that happened in our music long before rap.
Right.
Volume replacing, volume being the replacement of power. Something that's loud is going to impose itself on you no matter what it is. Lack of emphasis on musical skill. Then you start to get down that road that's going to lead you to where we find ourselves now. But we can go right back up that road. And that's the thing that we're always kind of concentrating on collectively, all the music teachers and everyone who's involved in arts advocacy and music education. How can we go back up the road?
How can we?
Just the way we doing, we want to lose weight. We just stop eating bread and start exercising. That's what.
Yeah, it could be challenging. I mean, you talk about de-emphasizing the rhythm section. In some ways, the great music that you grew up appreciating had syncopation, which is a complex form of rhythm. I mean, you want to explain syncopation?
Well, syncopation has always been in American music. You start off with with fiddle bands. You go back to the early 1800s. Or like a piece like Boil 'em Cabbage Down. Now when you syncopate it, you go. It's America.
Bravo.
See? And it's American. It's not like Mark O'Connor is a great fiddler today. He's from Seattle. Yeah. He and I are contemporaries. We talk all the time about the Afro-American traditions, the Anglo-American traditions, and he started playing Boil 'em Cabbage Down in a rehearsal we were having. We happened to be in France. He didn't want to stop playing it. We had to say, man, stop.
You know, some of the great old music brought a lot of strands together, jazz in particular. Do you see that there's some types of music that bring races together, bring different types of people together, and some that kind of divide and bring us into little segments?
You know, I don't ever find music divide us. I find that maybe the marketing of music will divide us. And I find that most musics around the world are trying to bring people together. Most musicians want to do that.
Is that the role of the artist, in a way, as a leader?
That's what we like to do. Like if I can tell you a story, make you laugh, I want you to laugh, you know. If I can play a trumpet or something and people get around and say, let me check this trumpet out. If I remember something that you might remember too, I want you to remember that. If I can make you feel a certain way, it makes me feel good to make you feel like that. So if I can make 1,000 people feel that way, I want to do that. I mean, it makes me feel like I'm doing something worthwhile with whatever ability I've been given. And I think people many times have that ability and they know they have it when they're younger. It might not manifest in their art form, but it just manifests in their life.
You know, that leads to what we sometimes call the Tisch question, which Laurie Tisch asked that we asked because you just touched on it, which is, how do you hope the world will be a different place because of you being here?
Well, I think, I don't know, it seems grandiose. You say
I know,
world.
that's why I made Laurie take the blame for it.
I'm afraid, but I think that through my virtuosity, or what I developed just when I was a younger person, and the desire and the willingness to practice and spend time trying to develop my artistry on my instrument. I hope for all the musicians or all the younger people that I've had a chance to inspire, they listen to me. I want to leave them inspired that you can that you can work on something and be consistent and believe in something and do it. And in playing classical music, coming from Kenner, Louisiana, not really having anybody around me playing like that, being inspired by the great Maurice Andre, who was from France, that there are people all over the world who are inspired by something that they think may be remote for their culture, and they understand it's not remote because it's in the realm of the human. And in all the collaborative pieces that we've done, like Blood on the Fields or Congo Square that we did with an African a group from Ghana, or what we did with the Flamenco Jazz Ensemble in Chano Dominguez, or our friends Igor Bootman from Russia bring their big band to play with us. I hope that the people who get around it understand the feeling of love of Mark O'Connor and I, the genuine love and respect that we have for each other. And when we start playing, it's not a slogan, that we are playing together. Or Willie Nelson and I, we talk about all the time how somebody would think it's funny because he has a cowboy hat on or something, and I have a suit, and I'm whatever years younger than him, we're that much different, but we play the same music. He's from Texas, I'm from Louisiana. And whoever busted him the other day should be. That's just bad manners. That was just an example of bad manners, man. So, you know, through that, I like to do that. And and in terms of what we have achieved in New York with Jazz at Lincoln Center, people of all different walks of life. Like when I first met Lisa Schiff or Gordon Davis or many people I have the honor and privilege to work with, I had never really met people outside of music. Mm-hmm. And that we could come together and work and perform a civic duty and provide, and for all the people I've taught, kids I've taught, thousands of them all through the years, just I hope I transmitted some of that love and feeling.
That's right.
I want you to lose that. that they felt a certain type of love and a seriousness about that to them. And
you know, when we talk about Louis Armstrong, his father abandoned him, but he watches him on the Zulu parade. His father, Willie Armstrong, marching in the Zulu, or riding in the Zulu parade. And the whole notion of race and signifying and everything starts getting into Louis Armstrong. Talk to me a little bit about race and music and race in America today, how you see it.
Well, you know, that's an issue of extreme complication. So I think we all have, I always like to look at big problems and simplify them by making them personal. Because, you know, if you write a string quartet, you take a Beethoven string quartet, there's actually much more nuance in the four voices than when he wrote for orchestra. Mm-hmm. Because when you deal with big themes, you have to have very concrete structures. Boom, 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 ba 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 boom, ba 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 ba. It's got to be like, okay, all my woodwinds are going to do this. Here's my brass section. Bam, they're going to come in to be definitive. Race is in our Constitution. We fought the Civil War over it. We dealt with Reconstruction and the failures of Reconstruction led us to the Civil Rights Movement all these years later. We had the second Reconstruction, which is called the Reagan Reformation or whatever they call it. Lyndon Johnson knew he was throwing the South away with the Civil Rights Act. He understood that, and he did. Up to this present moment, we have a shared history. We know that history more or less. But I tend to look at things very personally and say that we all have something we don't really want to deal with, all of us. Mm-hmm. We don't want it discussed. We get angry when it's brought up. I don't mean in public, it's just if it's just us talking to ourselves. We don't want to talk to ourselves about it. But that almost always is the thing we have to deal with to get better. Sometimes we deal with it for a little while and then we get away from it because it's too intense. But until we deal with it personally, we'll never get better. Many of us go to our graves and we never get better, and we're comfortable with that because we set up everything in our lives to go with that thing we don't want to deal with. That's the position we're in as a nation. Until we can have honest dialogue about this history, not blaming white folks or blaming black folks or pretending like both sides have a point, all that is a waste of time. We have a shared history that has been successful and that has been a failure. Let's take the successful parts on it and figure out how to make those. But until we recognize it, until we can be truthful about it, we're just wasting our time. We're changing laws around. It's the same thing with a different word.
How can the arts help us deal with that?
The arts are honest. Walt Whitman, what he was writing during the Civil War about black and white people, man, you can't believe it. Somebody was walking around writing that. Mm-hmm. You can't. The only thing that saved his life was nobody was reading it.
Him and Emily Dickinson.
You know, I mean, Winslow Homer.
Right.
Winslow Homer was in the South painting black people, and they wanted to lynch him. He was like, they look good to me, mm-hmm. boss. Mm-hmm. You know, Frank Sinatra, Benny Goodman. I mean, it's in our history. We just don't know it. Of people saying, man, how can we go for this? And we need to teach it to our kids. it's not a matter of education. It's what are you educating them in? Because we do have great moments in our history that are worthy of we have profound moments in our history worthy of great celebration, but we don't know what they are. So we're reduced to chanting USA, USA. And we're reduced to things that are beneath what our actual history has been.
What inspires you in history? Give me an example.
I'm inspired by Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address. I'm inspired by just sentences like, he had one I was reading the other day where he said, let not traditions long established be dismantled for light and transient causes. That made me think of the wah-wah pedal. You know, and I'm inspired by, we could go on and on, Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro. I'm inspired by the fact of, what can we pick? The fact of Biggs Beiderbecke and Louis Armstrong. The fact of swing dancing and the fact that people in our country in the 1930s, regardless of race and age, danced together. The fact of all these things. It could be anything that I look at. I looked at The Wizard of Oz. It was a TV show on about how they made that. Man, just the care and the love and the concern and we've done unbelievable things in this country. So when I look into American history, and I look into any branch of it, I can look into some of the darker corners of our history, and I still see people who are always fighting for that not to be the reality of our nation. And I sit here tonight, I'm always cognizant of that those people were victorious. Sometimes there's the feeling that they were not victorious because the victory is not complete, but they had to leave something for us to do. And we're going to leave something for the next people to do. So I'm always inspired when I look into our history.
What leaders inspire you now?
It's not that many of them.
Or artists?
A lot of artists like Mark O'Connor. He's trying to start a whole movement of string music. He has an education method. He writes symphonies. He has fiddle camps that he does in the summertime. Has taught thousands of kids. His son graduated from Harvard. Forrest is his name. And Mark wrote a newsletter to everybody who knew him about the accomplishments of his son, starting an American music. The word is escaping me, but to get the kids involved in American music. So just off the top of my head, I could name him because we're contemporaries. But there are many others that I love him. I love to be around. I love to talk to him. I could just hear him play, and we start talking about the music and what we need to learn and what we want to do. And I find that there are many people in all walks of life who are like him and who are trying to do things, and I'm inspired by them. They don't have to be getting publicity so much, but I always see people.
You're trying to write a blues symphony now. Why are you doing that?
Because I want to put down our forms and things about our forms that I think and have it etched in stone, like in something you can look at and study and see, okay, this is the difference between a Western shuffle, or this is the train whistle, this is the Southern two groove, or this is the Eastern Seaboard two, or this is the New York. I'm trying to put, to codify things that have been created, vernacular elements in this culture, and see if it's possible to get people who don't play that to sound good playing actually our style of music. And I was inspired by something Willie Nelson actually told me. We're on this bus talking, and he said that he started off, he was playing bass at the Grand Ole Opry. And he said, well, you know, the interesting thing about playing bass as opposed to guitar is when you change one or two notes on the bass, you change the meaning of the music. Not just something like that. You change a note on the bass, the feeling of the whole music changes. So then he started to talk about all the different ways they would play a country two beat. I was telling him, I hear a country two go boom, 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 boom. I said, it sounds like the same beat. He said, oh, no. There's plenty of ways to play that country two beat. So I'm inspired by that type of investigation of our ways of doing things with our music, meaning American music.
You know, you mentioned the country two beat, and then there's, you know, the four beat of the marches of the Civil War, and then the six beat. Right. And people have gotten away from understanding the beats.
Right. Well, I could give you a quick, this is going to make sense. Let me figure out how to make it make sense. Okay. Let's say African music, in a generic sense, they play in 6 and 4 at the same time. So let's say this is 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. On top of that, so you hear that 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you take something like to count these rhythms out, we have to play the high 6 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. You take the Battle Hymn of the Republic. But it's in 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. This is the lower 4. 1, 2. Take Mickey Mouse. Then that's our rhythm called a shuffle. You heard it in rock and roll all the time. Or the Washington Post March.
So it's mixing 4 and 6.
With our
combining
music,
them.
with our music, right? In American music, we combine the 6 and the 4 a certain way. So a lot of it's like male, female. It's a polarity issue.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of balance, as it always is. You don't want to be too 4 heavy. You got to always pay attention to 6.
Okay. Try to remember that.
Don't forget about 6. You might think you're in 4, but you might be in 6. So better ask somebody.
When the hurricane hit, and we decided we weren't sure New Orleans was ever going to reopen again. And then you got on a bus, I think, from Carnegie Hall with your people, your band, and everything else. And you drove all the way down to New Orleans because we were doing something trying to reopen the city. Why did you do that? And why were you so convinced New Orleans was going to come back? Because, frankly, I wasn't.
Well, I knew about our culture. I mean, where we're coming from. We're resilient people. Mm-hmm. People used to brag about hurricanes. I always joke with them now. I say, y'all not bragging about Katrina. They brag, oh, Betsy came in, she knocked down everything. I was walking with water up to my hip, and, well, she wasn't bad as Camille. Oh, Lord, when Camille came in. And nobody talking about Katrina. No, you're not saying nothing. It's big silence around. But I just knew kind of our culture. But for me, it was even our organization, Jazz Lincoln Center. We had just got into our building, and we were under tremendous financial strain, and our whole organization got behind it. And we raised money, $4 million for Katrina in a year that we really didn't want to do it. Mm-hmm. So I just think I'm inspired because I'm around so many people that are giving all the time. And for me, it was an honor for me to work in any context. It's my city. And I think that it was a triumphant story, really, the way people all over the United States of America rallied for our city. We had governmental problems, but we shouldn't let those problems with our government and our systems cause us to overlook what people actually did. And for me personally, I always go back to when I went to Tanglewood. I was 17 and I received a scholarship. I got a letter about the scholarship. It's a fellowship program. And I didn't write a letter to the gentleman that gave me the scholarship, just out of ignorance. So maybe 5 years later, he came to my concert and said, I gave you your scholarship at Tanglewood. I said, yeah, man, thank you. He said, you didn't write me a letter. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I apologize. We talked and stuff. We had established kind of a relationship, but it made me understand that you do things because people make it possible for you to do things. Sometimes you think there's a they that just does something, and these things happen. Well, with Katrina and everything, when I see younger kids who come to my concerts, I tell them this story about me not writing. And I tell them, don't take this teacher for granted, or don't take this person for granted that's with you. Don't take the person who gave you this scholarship for granted. Don't think these things are just here. They're not. So that's kind of the spirit for me. I wish I could do more. I wish I could have done more.
You did a lot. You did the higher ground, right?
Hey, yeah. All the Jazz Lincoln Center, we did it, but we're a New York institution.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we turn up some of the house lights if we could, because I want to go to questions. And first of all, let me recognize Jennifer. Where's Jennifer? Jennifer Robb? Jennifer is our co-host, president of Hunter College.
Right now.
A spirited, wonderful, great partner for us to have. Thank you for allowing us to use Hunter, and thank you for being the Aspen Institute's partner in this. We sure appreciate it. And Bob Steele, who's the chairman of our board, is here somewhere. And Elliot Gerson. Elliot runs these public programs, all of our policy programs, and all the international programs of the Aspen Institute, which causes people to sometimes ask me what I do for a living. But the dirty little secret about Elliot is that he's got Jamie Miller, who actually runs the public programs here. So thank you, Jamie. I want to thank all these people for making it work, and Laurie Tisch and the Tisch family very much. I'm going to go to questions, but I'm going to call on somebody first, because when I was first being interviewed to come to the Aspen Institute, I went to go see Sidney Harmon. And I went to his office in Washington, and here's a guy who hung with presidents and prime ministers and everything. He had one picture in the office. It was a picture of Wynton Marsalis, picture of Sidney and Wynton. And I said, why? And he said, because this guy has taught me not just about arts, but about music and leadership. And I said, what do you mean? And he told me a story about leadership and leading. Maybe you can tell it, Sidney, and ask a question. But it's the person where you stand in a band if you're Wynton and you want to be the leader. Why don't you give Sidney the microphone and let him ask a question? And then we'll go to other questions. Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to pay tribute to two of the most remarkable people I have had the honor to know in a very long life. These two children from New Orleans are together as they ought to be, perfect models for our greatest aspirations. Walter, I tell you briefly, is a man of many, many parts.
That's enough. Back to Wynton, please. Yes, right.
He spoke of our first meeting, but I tell you of a time when he was 5 years of age, and New Orleans was then threatened by a hurricane virtually as severe and threatening as Katrina, and his folks sent him out of harm's way to spend time with the family in Nashville. And 24 hours after he arrived, his parents received a wire which read briefly, "We are returning, Walter. Send the damn hurricane." And I remember one of the true joys of my life now, almost 2 decades ago, I traveled with this remarkable guy. We had invented a program titled Harmon How to Listen. We went to the disadvantaged public schools across the country, and I was in the company of the greatest Pied Piper ever in history, and he taught these kids to love music through storytelling, through call and recall, through syncopation, but through his most remarkable, stunning humanity. And when our tour across the country had ended, I returned home and explained to my wife that it had been a quite remarkable experience for me. We were invited, Wynton and the junior, to come to every local radio station in every town where we visited. And there we were on the radio or television, as it might have been. And I was utterly amazed. I would explain to Jane Harmon, now my congresswoman, I was utterly amazed every time we walked into the lobby of one of these office buildings, because all of the stations were located in office buildings. There was an outpouring of every secretary in the city. And they had all come apparently to see me. My wife laughed as you do. I salute you, Wynton. I salute you, Walter.
Thank you very
What a
much,
pair.
Sidney. And when I first came to Time magazine, one of the first covers was Wynton Marsalis, and I know somebody now can get you on the cover of Newsweek as well. So. Questions, please, thoughts? I have trouble seeing, so. Yes, and identify yourself, you would.
Yes, good evening. My name is Joyce Johnson Miller. I'm a proud Henry Crown Fellow of the Aspen Institute. I'm part of the WeGo. How are you doing, Mr. Isaacson? Congratulations to you, Mr. Marsalis, for your Civic Leadership Award, and thank you for Hunter College and the Tisch family for honoring us. Mr. Marsalis, I have to go one place for thank you for keeping us civil with Blues Alleys, with you and Jeff and Brendan when I was at American University. We kept alive with what you all were doing there. And as a fellow trumpet player, I'm very excited. My Crown Fellow program, and he knows I got the stories. My Crown Fellow program centers around youth and getting them back involved and bringing music back into the school system, which, as we all know, has been a struggle. And Mr. Marsalis has done a fabulous job of trying to change that. I have another struggle that I'm seeking some guidance on. Before, we didn't have Blackberries, Crackberries, Wii's, all these different devices to change what you sought the discipline in the music. And when I started playing trumpet, that's all we had, is sit down, turn the TV off, and play your trumpet. How do we encourage young people to find that joy and satisfaction that you seem to have ignited a lot in some of your programs in music? And two, a question that's similar but a little different. You often spoke, when we spoke, about Stravinsky, and you spoke about him more as a philosopher in any way when you and I chatted. How can you chat a little bit about how you tied in Stravinsky to your views on music, discipline, the arts, etc.? And now you remember who I am. But tie it into this, if you could, that would be very helpful, because it was also a discipline that I think we're struggling to help our young people understand how to bring music back
How will
into the system.
Stravinsky save us from the BlackBerry?
Well, first about the Blackberries and all that, I actually embrace that more. I'm not a technically literate person at all. My son teases me all the time, asking me, come turn this TV on. It's got 2 remotes to it. But I believe that there's always distractions. And my great uncle was born in 1883, and I lived with him for a year when I was 6. He didn't have hot water in his house, and stuff like the television was newfangled. And his thing was there's always distractions, because you're gonna always look for them. And I feel like with kids, it's not incumbent upon them. I think that you wanna know about kids, it's more comes from us. We provide the environment for them. There's no kids, really. They want to follow us. They want to love their parents. They want you to lead them. They want to be guided. And I've taught thousands upon thousands of kids. A lot of times when kids are really unruly and show their little behinds a lot, that's just like a cry out for you to spend more time with them. They want you to take them to things. They want you to sit down and discuss things with them. They might act like they don't get it, but they'll get it. And I've seen so many teachers all over this country with kids. I've seen so many people who are not teachers with groups of 30 kids, 40 kids, out spending their night, standing up with them. I'm talking about all over. You pick a place. Omaha, Nebraska, Brighton, Illinois, San Angelo, Texas. It don't make a difference what you name. It's parents and people there. So that's what I think about. We just need to bring kids into our lives, into our feeling. And we got to also help kids with the rituals of courtship. When your sexuality kicks in, you're 12, 13 years old, what's there for you? MTV or whatever the video channel happens to be, or something that's quasi-pornography. What you think you're gonna do? It's a no-brainer. You got to deal with them. The most important times in their lives, you got to be there, because whatever's on the TV show don't know more than what you know. I've had to tell that to my sons many times. Boy, I don't care what you're looking at. I know much more than they know about this. And I'm sitting here talking to you. You're not going to meet them. Okay, so I think that about, and with the arts in our schools, we just have to make it a priority. And we just keep, one day we'll realize, I tend to look at that problem like I think of the bubonic plague in Europe. Everybody was looking all over. They're bleeding people, looking up in the sky, saying prayers. They didn't look at the rats. By the time they discovered it was rats, they run its course. That's, to me, how our nation is when it comes to what the problem is with our education system. We need to teach our kids what it means to be us. Then we'll stop having to hyphenate everything. We have a history in this country. It is a joint history. take the significant parts of that history, take the significant achievements, battle with people over what they are, but get them in front of our kids. And then about Igor Stravinsky, I don't know. You know, Stravinsky, he loved Diaghilev. So Diaghilev did these big ballets, and he believed in Stravinsky. He gave Stravinsky a chance to, right? Stravinsky's music has a lot in common with John Coltrane's music that he played in the 60s. So that's my test for you. Tell me what that is, what they have in common.
Thank you. My name is Valerie. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. My name is Valerie Brown, and I'm a tremendous fan of your music. I'm also a supporter of Jazz at Lincoln Center through the Chairman's Circle. My question is, how do you think about the integration of spirituality and a more secular perspective in your music? I always notice the audience response. As an example, when I heard your performance that was commissioned to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Abyssinian Baptist Church, the response when you go to see Alvin Ailey perform Revelations, which you did with Jazz at Lincoln Center's orchestra. And I would just be curious to get your thoughts about the integration of the spiritual and the secular in music and in the arts.
Well, I think that, and this is a important concept. Once I was talking to Yaqub Adi, he's the drummer that has a group named Odada. And he told me, this is a royal rhythm. So they played this rhythm, boom, 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 boom. I said, it's not royal to me. It sounds like a rhythm. He said, I know. That's why you play it the way you play it. So I said, what makes it royal? He said, it is royal because we say it is royal. I asked Paco de Lucia, great flamenco guitarist, he wanted to let me know that Miles Davis did not play flamenco music on Sketches of Spain. Okay, he was playing music, but it was not flamenco music. So I asked him, what chance do you think I have of actually sounding good playing bulerías? It's a form that they play. He said, virtually none. He said, maybe you can survive on the form if you learn it, but to play with the meaning, never. He said, even I get lost on it, and I'm supposed to be the master of it. I'm saying all that to say that there has to be a difference between secular and sacred. But you're the one who determines what that difference is, your group of people. And it's important for that to be maintained. Why? It's because of the 4 and the 6 rhythm. Why is it important for the 6 to be different from the 4? It's just beats, but it's different. Because it's your music's rock back and forth between these things, and you play with that line between the secular and the sacred. But once the sacred music becomes infected with secularism, it affects the music, like what has happened to Afro-American church music. I don't want to see somebody playing a funk groove and doing this, singing about Jesus. Why? I just don't want to see that. I'm not going to argue it in court. I don't want to see that. Do you know what I mean? And vice versa. I'm not going to a juke joint on Saturday night for somebody to play Amazing Grace. Or in New Orleans, we understood that for some reason. We played hymns at funerals and stuff. I never played a dance and played hymns. Why? I don't know. We didn't sit down and talk about it, but just something seemed inappropriate. I'm here at a burlesque show and I'm playing Nearer My God to Thee. No. So I think it's important for those two, for your culture and for your sense of self, for you to have a healthy sense of those two things. And I also think it's healthy for you to participate in them too. That you got to do something on Saturday so that you can get to Sunday. Mm-hmm. You can be very fervent on Sunday if you got a reason to be. So I'm not an advocate of getting rid of either. They both are very good.
What was important to you spiritually growing up?
For me, it was the Bible. I like the stories. Because I grew up really in segregation, and when Martin Luther King died, my mama sent us to an all-white school and it was very difficult circumstances.
I don't know the story.
Well, you know, it's not a story I tell a lot.
Yeah.
But we ended up getting, King died. She said, well, King sacrificed, somebody got to sacrifice their kids, we're going to sacrifice y'all. And let me tell you something, that was a sacrifice. But I'm glad for the experience now, but then you go from being we were in segregation basically. I mean, Kenner, Louisiana, you know what's happening down there. Then have to go to school and be called nigger every day and monkey and all
Where'd
this
you go to
stuff.
school?
Our Lady of Perpetual Help, it was called.
And so that's when they integrated the parochial school system?
Well, the integration was on the books, but nobody wanted to do it. My mama grew up completely segregated, and so did my father. So it's like if the thought of sending your child or something into a foreign environment that you perceive to be hostile was not something anybody wanted to do if they had the wherewithal to do it. We're on a program where you could work after school and make enough money to pay the tuition, because the school's then, and it was with a lot of poorer Italian kids, which I would never have met any of them. I mean, we lived in a very segregated, prescribed way. So that experience of every day having to deal with that gave me a strange relationship to religion. But it didn't affect my belief in kind of the stories. My uncle, my aunt, my mama, they were all very devout people who believed in the Old and the New Testament, Judeo-Christian belief system. Because I went to the school and it had like a religious name, and nuns and everybody were dealing with the same type of racism and ignorance, it made me, of course, have a vibe of this is all hypocritical. And it was when it came to that. But I still had a training in a rooted in that tradition. And it's a tradition that I believe in. But I don't believe in it to the detriment of other people's belief system. But I do believe in the stories in the Old and the New Testament. I believe in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And my pieces, I put things that are of the Judeo-Christian belief. And I believe in the Afro-American take on the Judeo-Christian.
You have a lot of spirituals that come through.
I grew up with it and I love it. And I don't apologize for it. Or, I don't care what's fashionable. It's what I believe in. My aunt, my great uncle believed in it. My daddy, my mama. That's enough for me.
What's your favorite spiritual?
Man, there's so many great ones. I mean, my favorite spiritual would have to be, Go Down Moses.
Yeah, you use that in one of your symphonies.
Yeah, I use the themes from the spirituals all the time. And I study the spirituals. I went up to the Schomburg and got the original copies of the first publications of the spirituals. I check them out. I return to them over and over again. I try to figure out what they are. And I return to Anglo-American folk music also. Jerry Mulligan, the great baritone saxophonist. I miss him so much. We used to have the most honest discussions about race, and they would become quite heated sometimes. And he treated me like I was his kid, because he spoke to me with a familiarity and an honesty, which I always appreciated. So maybe if somebody would see he and I talking to one another, they would say, man, y'all really don't like each other. He told me once, we're talking about a white musician named Adrian Rollini, who was a bass saxophone player. I had never heard of him. So we're arguing about white and black musicians in America. He said, well, let me just put it to you this way. You are not a better musician because you don't know who Adrian Rollini is. Mm-hmm. So some arguments I will get him, and some he will get me. And that sentence made me understand the value of knowledge.
He was the one who told you didn't have a sense of your black history.
No, that wasn't him.
Who was that?
That was just a kid that was in McHale's club. I was arguing with him about something he told me that made me mad. We were both like 18 or 17 at that time. And he said, you ever read Letter from a Birmingham Jail? Of course I had never read it. He said, of course you haven't read it because you're black. Uh-huh. And he started to, we were arguing, so it was okay for him to tell me. He could say what he wanted, because believe me, I was telling him what I wanted to say too. I'm only telling you what he told me. I'm not telling you what I told him. So, we two young kids, we going at it. We in the club. It's not like anybody's interviewing us. We going in our thing. What I took away from what he told me was I need to know who this man was. That's all. Now, I didn't tell him that when he was standing in front of me. But when I went home, I thought, education comes in all forms.
Yep. Yes, sir.
I'm Bob Appel, and I'm fortunate enough to be a trustee at Jazz at Lincoln Center. And the question I have for you, Wynton, is that you did a lot of traveling this summer, Berlin, Mexico, but we were lucky enough to be with you in Cuba as you opened it up to one of the first American groups to go down there. And it was a very emotional experience. I wonder if you can give us some of your reactions to the Cuban experience.
Oh man, thank you, Bob. Just you know, so many musicians that can play, young musicians. You go into a school, it's like 200 students standing around, 35 of them playing instruments, people playing cellos, trumpets, better than you ever heard. Maybe I heard more good musicians in the one school than we hear in 10 years of traveling around our own country. And I mean, I'm not saying it like I love this country. I always have to make it clear. I'm critical of it in certain ways, but it's out of love. I've driven up and down it because I'm scared to fly. So I guarantee you, I know a lot more about it than you might think. And I love it, but they have like a spirit that comes from not having stuff. When you don't have something, you have to rely on other people. It reminds me a lot of my mother and father, and kind of black Americans that grew up in segregation, or non-black Americans who grew up really with nothing. They have to rely on one another. So the Cuban people have that feeling. I don't know if it'll be maintained once it opens up, but for this period of time that we were there, just the type of love and feeling, somebody's out on the street, sweeping the street, and two people come and help this lady move all of her stuff, and it's just a spirit there that was moving for me. And the musicians were unbelievable. Young kids coming up playing. I'm gonna tell you one thing. Then I'm not gonna say anything about it. The most striking thing about it for me, it's a thing that I've never believed in our country. It's the generation gap. When I was 17, I didn't believe in that. When I was 25, I always thought this is the stupidest thing in the world, because I never felt nobody I knew was hipper than my father, or any of the older musicians I knew, or my great uncle, or my grandma, people who had gone through something. When you meet those students, like the students at one school came to me and they were beaming. We want you to meet our ear training teacher. She's the greatest teacher in the world. You have to meet her and talk to her. And this were like 15 and 16-year-old kids. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in our country, because it does happen, but not as frequently as it should. So I find with the people in Cuba and with the kids that I met, the one big difference I felt about them is they didn't have the concept of a generation gap. It doesn't mean they all get along with their parents, but it means that their national concept is not, we're young, we have to disrespect older people to be young. That's what I mean. I didn't have that sense. And it left me feeling really hopeful for our own country and our attempts to come back from this very destructive philosophy that has harmed and ruined so much more than whatever it could have possibly helped.
We get an album out of this Cuba trip?
Yeah, we're actually working on 4 of them, because we did 5 concerts
Okay.
of all different music every night. So we're doing them. It was a great experience. Playing with the Cuban music, everything was just
And to
unbelievable.
pick up on that last thing you said about it gives you hope for our country, I once heard you say that wherever you go, people always ask you at the end, are we coming together? Is it going to be all right?
Yeah, it's going to be all right, because we're going to make it be all right. But it's here. It's in our arts. Like, if you want it to be all right, check Walt Whitman out. Check Duke out. He's telling you, yeah, it's all right. But we have to do this for it to be all right. And if we don't do it, we're going to still, 15 years later, be wondering what's wrong. Maybe we need to have more testing. Maybe we come up with a harder standardized test. Or maybe we need to open up nursery schools in the schools. Or maybe we need to, all these things. Yeah, we can do all of that. But we have to learn how to be ourselves and the best of ourselves and teach that to our kids.
Wynton Marsalis, thank you very much.
Thank you.